What is up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and it's time for Trench Talk. Today I sat down again with Doug Moore of Pyrrhon to talk about the new album. It's called Abscess Time via Willowtip Records. But before I get to that, if you're a fan of interviews with talented underground metal artists, then be sure to subscribe to this podcast. You can actually listen via YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and CastBox. But regardless of which platform you choose, I would also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, because there is also other video content available there for you to enjoy, like album reviews, album roundups, tier lists, so on and so forth. Go check it out. But without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Yeah, well, silver linings, you know?
Yeah, that's what I'm always looking at. Well, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Obviously, so I live in Queens, which is, a pretty spooky place to be right now, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But I have been working from home for years, actually, and my line of work is such that I can do it without losing too much from my apartment. And fortunately, my significant other, who I live with, is also in the same camp. So we haven't been as negatively affected by it as some. We are definitely missing the ability to go out, but we're both like pretty well suited to a more insular kind of lifestyle, I guess. I mean, we're both creative people who spend a lot of time alone anyway, just doing our thing. So the main thing that I've been bummed out by is the fact that live music just doesn't exist anymore. And obviously when you have an album coming out, we were supposed to, tour and play lots of shows and whatnot around this time. And that's obviously not going to happen, which, is not the end of the world for a band like us. We're not making our livings doing Pyrrhon or anything like that. So it's not as much of a blow as it might be if we were, depending on the band for our income. But it's still just definitely frustrating. We work really hard on the record. We want to go out there and, bring it to the people. But it's going to have to wait till next year at the earliest, it seems like.
Yeah. And it is a bummer. And that's just been a trend of kind of these podcasts lately, is talking to people who are super bummed. It's like kind of, it's kind of soul crushing in a way. But like, I don't know if you listened, but, to the people out there listening at the time we're recording this, this week's episode that just dropped was with Ethan McCarthy of Primitive Man and Vermin Womb and everything.
Yeah, and he is definitely really fucked. He's actually a booking agent. So, and we were talking to him about putting a tour together for this summer, a little bit after the album comes out, and of course that did not occur for obvious reasons. And but his whole life is
music,
touring in bands and booking other bands. And but we everyone in Pyrrhon, fortunately has something else going on that, is like our source of income. But people who are, full on, like, full-time music professionals, those people are really fucked right now. So
yeah, it's a real bummer to hear people who are like just known as sort of pillars of the scene be just absolutely dejected by the situation right now.
Yeah, well, one of the problems is that it's so precarious in the first place, like even under the best circumstances, extreme independent underground music just, exists on a razor's edge always. Like there's always barely enough money to make it work. The reason it works at all is because people are so enthusiastic about it and so willing to make sacrifices, and like, everyone who's booking bands like Pyrrhon out there, they're not doing it because we're such a cash cow. They're doing it because they're like, into it and, willing to accept the risk that it might not be an awesome show.
Yeah.
So I really feel for those people, because they're already putting themselves so far out there, and then just like something that's completely beyond their control and beyond everyone else's control to just come along and totally upset the apple cart. It really fucking sucks, man. So anyway, cheery stuff already here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's like I try to not talk about it too much because I know honestly, like when I'm listening to other people's podcasts and they start talking about it too much, I'm like, can we talk about something like anything,
Yeah,
literally anything else?
sure.
So
It's it's
yeah,
it's very. We are all very tired of hearing about it.
yeah.
So on that note, perhaps we should move on.
Yeah. Let's talk about the new album because this thing is fucking batshit, man. Like, I was really intrigued when I even just first pressed play on that title track, and I kind of had a certain set of expectations in my mind coming off of the last album, and those were like immediately just scattered to the wind. So, what was going on as you guys were recording this?
Um, well, I think it's funny that you mentioned the title track thing because there's been not super consciously, it's just kind of in the spirit of the band, but something that keeps on occurring for our full lengths is that they always start off with a song that's kind of a curveball relative to our past recordings.
Mm-hmm.
So on the first album, the first song is a new Parasite, which is this like long sprawling number. We hadn't done anything like that in our demo and our EP that came out before we did a full length. So that was kind of like a big like sort of new thing for us. On the second album, the first song is Oracle of Nassau, which is a short grind song, which we hadn't done up to that point. So that was another like kind of a curveball. The third album started with a bunch of noise and sampling and stuff, like just like some weird collage thing that Marston made, um, which also I think we hadn't really done at that point. And then this new one on Abscess Time, the title track is like this plotting, like
It's yeah.
noise rock, like just a sort of abuse session. And that I think we've kind of like sort of touched on that sound at various times in the past, but never just like gone full out and like done an entire track like that before. So
Yeah.
so for the fourth time in a row, we kind of opened up with something that was not totally in the vocabulary beforehand.
Yeah.
So yeah, that song is actually a new thing for us in some other ways too. It's the first song that Pyrrhon ever wrote as a group in the room with no like bass riff that some individual member brought in to work off of. We knew when we started writing the material for this album that we wanted to find new ways to employ our kind of intuitive or improvisational decision making. And we also wanted to write some material that was more about repetition and kind of vamping on a single idea and like really iterating through all the possibilities of like a very basic, simple concept, which again, we've like kind of fucked with in the past, but like when people think of Pyrrhon, I think for the most part, they think of like chaotic stuff that changes all the time and there's like
Yeah.
tons of different ideas, right? So which is so it's like that's kind of deserved. We've done a lot of that too. But so we wanted to kind of find a way that we could achieve some of the similar disorienting effects in a way that wasn't just about physicality and like throwing lots of different stuff at the listener. So yeah, that song we just like kind of got together in the room with no basic idea and just talked about what sort of thing we wanted to do and then just jammed on it until it kind of coalesced into something specific enough that we could play it repeatedly. And that was the first time we've ever written this. I mean, that's like a normal rock songwriting process for a lot of bands. Just, everyone gets together and noodles around until something comes together. But because Pyrrhon, historically, the music was so heavily structured most of the time, there was usually some originating member who like came in with a skeleton and kind of built it out from there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that song was a new thing in that respect. There's another song or two on the record that are like that. And then there's some songs that were more just like full on spontaneous improvisation where we just maybe discussed it a little bit before recording and then literally just, we attempted the idea a few times and picked our favorite. So, in the sense that it may feel like a bit more of a like loose or less like rigid and like death metal-y record
Yeah.
is because we were relying more on those kinds of compositional approaches. I mean, there's still some very structured technical death metal type stuff on there too.
Yeah.
But we definitely opened up the playbook and reached for some more unconventional compositional techniques this time.
Yeah. And I think that's what threw me for such a loop is I feel like this album and What Passes for Survival are like night and day. Like they couldn't be more different albums because I mean, to me anyways, like I feel like as crazy as What Passes for Survival still is, it strikes me as much, it just feels much more structured and focused and kind of like it follows a certain path, whereas this album just sort of completely throws out the rule book and does whatever the hell it wants to. And maybe that's just my perspective on it.
I think that there's definitely an element of that going on. We were, like the whole premise of doing a band like this is to change from moment to moment. So it's always good for me to hear that the new album feels like a departure.
Yeah.
In terms of what might have caused that to occur in sort of the overall compositional headspace of the band, for What Passes for Survival, we were working with a new drummer. Steve had just joined the band relatively recently. And, Steve's a really remarkable player with a very specific set of strengths that we wanted to kind of capitalize on in a way that would feel like new and fresh for us. And what that turned out to be right off the bat was just like his power and his physicality, right? So we ended up writing a bunch of songs for that record that are just very, leaning forward all the time and like really like, going for the throat constantly and just like very physical, aggression driven music. I mean, of course, all Pyrrhon is kind of like that to some degree. Like, we're like an intense band, but that one, it was more just like,
you don't say.
Yeah. For that one, I feel like it was just more of like the death metal and grindcore influences were like kind of leading the way.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of other stuff going on, but that's like just what we were sort of focused on. We just wanted to like blast and blast and blast on that record. This one, we took a lot more time writing it. I think that we were, a little fatigued of playing like so aggressively all the time. And we had also just lots of other, like all these ideas that I was describing previously about writing in the room and doing songs that are, purely or like 95% improvised, all of that kind of stuff. Those were ideas we all had rattling around. Like another one that we had talked about many times before was doing songs that were more like vocal driven or just like that revolved more around what the vocals were doing. And so we felt like we had more time and more continuity in our lineup and in our lives with which to explore those kinds of more like tricky, like sort of heady ways to get outside of the normal songwriting box that we had built for ourselves.
Cool.
So, and also we just had like a bigger budget to work with this time, which meant that we could, stretch out more in the studio and try more like production-y ideas and do more takes of stuff and all that good stuff. So, so basically just like a bunch of different things aligned that led us to kind of push into the more spacey, weird direction of this record.
Nice. And would you say that as I mean, you talk a lot about sort of just the ideas and playing with the ideas. Is it just purely that, or were you listening to other bands or particular like styles of music during the recording process of this album that came out in this way?
I definitely like our listening habits had a huge impact on the sort of non-metal aspects of the record. But I think that most of the things that we were drawing on in that sense, they were kind of already there, right? It wasn't like we're like, oh, we discovered Swans, like time to do a Swans record, like we've been listening to that stuff for years and years. There's been a lot of that, a lot of like post-punk stuff, a lot of stuff from like kind of the noisier side of like the punk music spectrum sort of informed us on this. So those bands, I don't know, like Flipper, the earlier Black Flag stuff, sort of like I guess the mid-period Black Flag stuff when they started doing more of like noise and sludge type material.
Yeah.
See what else, like a bunch of I guess noise rock material from the late 80s and 90s. All those touch and go bands and AMREP bands. Those have always been kind of a background influence for us, but something that we just wanted to explore more and more. for me, this is kind of a funny one. For me, I've been listening to a lot of Tom Waits recently.
Oh, okay.
And he's always been sort of an influence on my, um, I guess, approach to using different voices. He's always singing in different voices from song to
Yeah.
song, which I really like. And he has some, I think he's a great lyricist. Maybe some of that came out a little bit. I know I was thinking of him a little bit when I was working on the song "State of Nature," which is near the end of the record. It's like this kind of more vocal driven like song with just like a repetitive bass vamp going on the whole time. And we were working on that song. I was thinking of this Tom Waits song called "Step Right Up," which is on Small Change, where it's just like this kind of like um, looping bass part that he kind of rants and rambles over in this way, where he's kind of moving the vocal emphasis from the downbeat to the upbeat to the downbeat in this like disorienting way. And like obviously what I did was really different, and I'm not anywhere near Tom Waits as a singer or anything like that, but definitely like the way that his vocal will dictate like the flow of a song was something that I was thinking about a lot. But yeah, just in general, I would say that like at this point in my life, I've got a bunch of bands that I'm working on. They're mostly death metal bands of some description, right? So you and I talked about Weeping Sores a few months ago. Steve and I have another band called Sepidus that's like it's like a death and black metal band. I recently, it's not even recently anymore. We just haven't been able to release our album yet because of all the clusterfuck. I have another band with some other guys from the New York metal scene called Glorious Depravity, which is a more straight ahead death metal band with some guys from Woe and Mutilation Rights and some other area folks. But anyway, in all those bands, I'm like doing death metal vocals almost all the time, right? Like it's either a low death metal vocal or like a gurgly thing or like maybe some high, like the high vocals at Deicide or whatever, right? And I love doing that kind of vocal, but there's lots of other stuff that I like to do. And I think on this record, because I've been listening to all these other kinds of, heavy DIY underground music that aren't metal, I wanted to like just do more of that with my voice because I can. It's fun and the material called for it. So, so at least for me, like those influences had all been kind of simmering in the background for years, and then like we made this album where it was appropriate to use them. So, and I think that's probably true for the other guys as well.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And honestly, I consider that to be like a defining element of a truly memorable and like great metal band is that diversity in the vocals where you can kind of it's more dynamic and so therefore it's more engaging, but then also like I live for vocalists that like you hear just a few seconds of them and you know who it is like instantly. And there's a lot of very different versions of that, ranging from the more kind of standard like I mean Trevor from the Black Dahlia Murder like kind of does his own his usual thing, and it's not like this super original thing, but you can recognize his voice. But then you've got other things too where it's this like just sort of trying constantly new ideas and things like that. And to me that takes it to the next tier because you're innovating, like you're adding to the genre and kind of moving it in a new direction. And I think that's something I really strive for as I'm consuming new music.
Well, thank you very much, man. That's super high praise. I'm very flattered.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's definitely like, there's lots of bands in metal where they have like really broad stylistic vocabularies and can like, switch it up all the time. But that often just ends up feeling like a hodgepodge of random shit, it just doesn't really cohere into something distinctive. So to me, what's really important is having that like unique voice. And there's lots of, I mean, the vocalists that I like the most are usually guys who, they can do a few different things, but there always is that core identity. Like a good example to me is Dave Hunt, the guy from Anal Nathrak. He's got
great example.
He's got a million different registers. He can sing like 5-6 different voices, but you can tell who he is in all of those voices the instant that you hear him. You're not going to mistake him for someone else. And that's also, for me, that's like the kind of vocalist I aspire to be, the combination of like versatility and, really having a strong personality in what you're doing. That's really what I'm going for. So thank you.
Yeah. I think it's funny that you bring up Tom Waits too, because even though it seems like an out there reference, like I just name dropped him in my review for In the Company of Serpents. And
Oh, there you go.
yeah, and I have such a I have this fascination and kind of love for the idea of musicians who kind of have have that same metal vibe, even though they're not metal musicians, because there's like a certain darkness there. And I think Tom Waits definitely fits the bill for that. Like he's one of the most metal, like non-metal musicians out there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I listen to a fair amount of, the spooky singer songwriter genre like that. Like Nick Cave is another one I like a lot, who
Yeah.
has that, like, I mean, he was in more of like a heavy music type of band initially in the Birthday Party, and even like Grinder Man, like the garage rock side project, has some like sort of proto metal elements to it. But
Yeah.
for the most part, he's just like the singer songwriter guy, right? But he still has that. First of all, he's got like a really versatile delivery, but he also has a very distinctive personality and is a great lyricist. And his music comes from a place of like very, intense sort of
Yeah.
subaltern feeling, and I really like that about him.
Yeah. I really
So yes,
like I like
go
those
ahead.
artists that have this sense of sort of this sort of seething aggression that's like always sort of lingering but rarely kind of boils over. I mean, another weird example for me that I mean, I think it's weird for me, but anytime I bring her up, I've had a number of people be like, "Oh yeah, me too." But like Fiona Apple is like one of
Oh
my
yeah,
favorite
I love
singer-songwriters,
Fiona.
and I totally think of her when I talk about this cuz there's just constantly that simmering sense that like there's this tension and
Yo man, that
yeah.
that new album, the new album is angry as fuck.
I haven't
She's like,
heard it yet.
oh, oh dude, it's. I mean, I think it's great. It's a little bit more like it's funny because it's also like a more like somewhat sprawling, somewhat more like weird album than the last one. There's lots of crazy layering on it, like tons of layering her voice and some weird sort of like looping and repetition stuff. And there's tons of that like. And speaking of Tom Waits, there's tons of that like junkyard percussion or like kitchen percussion shit going
Oh
on.
nice. I dig
Yeah,
that.
it's an awesome album, and she is a powerhouse vocalist, like one of the best singers I've ever heard, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
She's
and seems
amazing.
to just get better and better with age. So yeah, no, definitely, she's another person like that.
Yeah. I think the main thing I thought of when I first started listening to the first track on this album was I described it as kind of like Bleach era Nirvana, but with kind of fed through a much more metal filter. So obviously it's even more aggressive than that, but that was sort of the first thing that my brain went to. It just strikes me as a very kind of 90s sounding album too.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean by that. I mean, I love Nirvana. Everyone in the band is at least a casual fan of the band. I'm probably the biggest fan of the band. In Pyrrhon, I am the biggest fan of Nirvana probably. But I would say that actually like a lot of the proximate influences on that era of Nirvana were also things that directly influenced us during the making of this record. I already named like Flipper and like the mid-period Black Flag stuff,
Right.
Elvins to a degree, Swans, Public Image Limited, a lot of these like plot Stooges, like a lot of these like plotting, like dirgy noise bands
Yeah.
from the 70s and 80s that play with a somewhat more modern, somewhat more metal aware kind of technique. That's like basically the set of forces that produced grunge, right? Which is the music that we all, as 90s babies, grew up
Yep.
listening to as kids. So
That
the
was my
pretty
shit.
pretty straight through line from that stuff through Nirvana to us. I mean, my dad got Nevermind like when it came out. I was like a 5-year-old. My dad's very
Yep.
rock and roll, as you can see. Yeah, you got Nevermind in like 91 or 92. So that was like the music of my childhood.
Yep. Same.
Nevermind's obviously a little bit less like gritty
Noisy.
than
Yeah.
Bleach, but we had Bleach after a couple years too. So, but yeah, so that stuff is, I mean, it's right there. And the other thing that I think probably contributes to that is uh, Colin's production aesthetic has a lot of that like spare, clear thing without a lot of processing or decoration that a lot of like the '90s, grunge and noise rock classics sort of, the Steve Albini style, like relatively simple, straight ahead production style. Like that's another thing that I think we kind of share. Though obviously there's a lot of weird noise elements and bells and whistles on this record too.
Yeah. Well, moving on from that track, because we talked about it a lot, are there
Right.
other, yeah, I mean, there's just so much to say about it, but are there other tracks on this album that particularly are like among your favorites now, or you feel like have interesting stories behind them?
Let's see. It's hard for me to really choose my favorites ever on an album. I think the ones that feel like the most fresh to me still um, are the three improvised songs. Each side of the LP has one song that is not actually structured. Um, and then there's two kind of like shorter songs about around the end of side two at the beginning of side three. There's three sides on the album. Uh, Cornered Animal and Human Capital, which are right next to each other. Those songs are just the songs that we wrote the last, and we wrote them really quickly. We had been like kind of chewing on the longer, more complicated stuff on the record for a really long time at that point. Running lots of reps of those songs, and really working over the details. And then, kind of like right before, within like 2 months of going into record, we kind of just cranked out these two short songs really fast, and they're not the most. I mean, they're still pretty complicated, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. It's hard for me to tell how complicated Pyrrhon songs are relative to other stuff because when you live inside of them for a long time, you just kind of forget that they're as naughty as they are. But yeah, those two songs, it was just like really fun to write them. I just really enjoyed the process because we just didn't deliberate over them as much as we had some of the other songs. Yeah, those two songs. I also do really like the two sort of more noise rock songs, the title track and State of Nature, because it's just so different from
Yeah.
any other Pyrrhon material so far. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm now just like I've named 7 of the songs on the record. I'm just shitting on the other 5 by not including them. Like I think it's all. I'm still fond of all of it, but those are the ones that I feel like push me the furthest out of my comfort zone, and that's something that I really seek in the creative process for that particular band, is being challenged and like approaching a composition and being like, I don't know what the fuck to do with this, so
Yeah.
I just like let my instincts like fire and not interrupt them, and let something come out and then shape whatever that is. And that's it can be taxing, but I really really like that process, and those songs all required me to do that.
Yeah. You're naming a lot of my favorites here. I mean, I'm definitely a very I mean, I guess I run the gamut. Like, I think by default, I prefer like the more full steam ahead kind of aggressive stuff, which is why Human Capital and Cornered Animal definitely are among my favorites on this album. But then I also really enjoy the twisting, turning contortions of like the lean years. And Down at Liberty Ashes too. It was kind of one of my first big favorites as I was
Yeah,
listening to this
yeah,
thing too.
that's one of the more classic style Pyrrhon songs, you might
Yeah.
say. It's like actually, it's actually some elements of death metal going on, which is only the case for probably like 50 to 60% of the record. A lot of it is just not even really metal, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure how to describe what we're doing at this point sometimes.
Yeah. Well, besides musical influences too, I always like to ask about, were there other things that you were consuming as you were going through the writing process that you feel like seeped their way either into the lyrical content or just the sound of this album from TV shows, movies, pop culture related things, whatever?
Um, the answer is definitely yes. I mean, I think that generally speaking, we're all kind of holistically influenced by our life experiences and our media consumption diets and all that stuff. Obviously, on this album, there are some samples from movies. The last album had a few samples too. This one, there's believe I'm drawing a blank on my own fucking album. It's Taxi Driver,
Oh, okay.
Hudsucker
Yeah.
Proxy, and what's the other one? I should know what this is. Oh yeah, Network. All of which are movies that are like kind of. I feel like you could say they're played out for sampling, but I think that we found some parts of those movies that aren't quite as obvious as what you usually hear, which is part of the point. One of the things that is kind of a recurring trope on and the song titles for this record is like sort of commonplace phrases that you just hear as part of everyday conversation that have been kind of decontextualized, so you can sort of hear how sinister they are. Like, human capital is just a term that is used in economics and the business world all the time, but like it's pretty creepy when you think about it by itself that humans are being treated as a commodity and it's just broadly accepted as a matter of course in daily life, right? So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I guess like more broadly, just the topicality of the news is a huge part of what goes into making Pyrrhon. Obviously, things are bad, as they say, and that was true before coronavirus, and it's going to be more true after coronavirus. And things obviously suck now. And I don't know. I just find that when you're playing metal or hardcore or punk or whatever, assuming that part of what you're trying to do is like scare people and upset people and and like get in touch with like the darker sides of life, like you don't have to look very far, like it's really easy to find stuff that's upsetting all around you. I mean, to me, that's all that stuff is far more creepy and unsettling than the usual zombies and Satan stuff that to me is now it's just like this fun, goofy, reminiscing of the 80s sort of vibe when people sing about that kind of thing. And that there's a place for that too, obviously, but it doesn't like evoke like a powerful response in me emotionally. And like, Pyrrhon's supposed to be a rather wrenching experience that way. So yeah, just like, reading the news is a thing that is the direct source for a lot of material. Trying to think of if there's anything else in particular that I don't really know. I don't really have a great answer on that. Like there was no particular book or movie per se outside of the movies that are actually literally on the record that I would point to as the specific source of inspiration for anything. It's all just kind of ambient, just a bunch of stuff floating around in our brains, and it comes out the way it comes out.
Yeah, it all comes together. Well, and I like what you said too about like, I think the difference I see in whether those influences come together in a way that works for me or not is like, how does it become personalized? And so I feel like some bands kind of like, they take what's on the headlines, they take what they're hearing on the news, and they just sort of regurgitate it back out almost word for word into lyrics. And it's like, yeah, they care, but it doesn't feel the same as with a band like yours, where it's like you're taking it in, you're filtering it through your own experience, your own thoughts, and kind of letting it come out in this more personal, genuine way. And I think that's what speaks to me. Like, I'm really into artists that are like, it feels like they're giving me a little piece of themselves as opposed to just sort of spitting back stuff that I've already heard like 10,000 times before throughout the day on social media and whatever.
Yeah, I think that you kind of nailed it there, man. Like that's really what I'm aspiring at least to do. I mean, I like lots of bands that are political, but I often find that the political aspect of the band just feels didactic and rote and sloganeering in a way that I don't really connect with emotionally. It's more when the lyricist is able to like inject a sincere emotional perspective into it, or to filter it through a set of specifics that make the broader principle that the song is about more concrete and more emotionally valent, I guess, So like a good example for me of a lyricist like this is Chris Callahan from Cursed, who's a really big influence on me. And his music, I mean, is almost all very explicitly political. You know, you see Cursed or his new band Sect, who are also really good. You see them live. He's doing the full on '90s hardcore guy, like speeches before every song about what the song's about. Like that's like the level of overt, politicalness of it, so to speak. Um, but the lyrics themselves are like really really well written, and they often are telling a specific person's story, or just generally finding ways to embed the idea that he's trying to get at into a more vibrant and sort of poetic framework that makes it a lot more effective to me than just you know protest slogans or whatever.
Yeah.
Actually, I think another person who's like this, to go back to Tom Waits, is he's doing this all the time. Tom Waits, so much of his work is about really marginalized people who are suffering from the way that the society around them is structured. But it's never just like society, man. You know, like it's about the people. It's about what they're experiencing and about their real internality and the sort of distinctive mix of emotions that makes up a unique person's story. And that to me is like so much more powerful, even in the political sense, than just like the more generic
Yeah.
political punk or hardcore lyrics would be,
Well,
or metal or grindcore for that matter.
yeah. I mean, it's true too. I mean, I'm as we're talking, I'm thinking of like the movie Inception, which is, I mean, it's a little corny, but I mean, it's true though. And as somebody, who works in mental health, it's true that like ideas that come from a personal place and like spawn from the inside are much more, they have much more longevity than something that you're just sort of being told and you're being parroted to. And so I appreciate music like you're describing, where it's like, of course, they're a human being, and so they have thoughts and feelings about stuff, and they need to put that into their music to be genuine. But if they can express it in such a way that's a little bit more ambiguous, so that the person listening can then do the same thing and kind of internalize their own thoughts about, okay, what does this mean to me? That leads to a much more powerful experience than, like, I'm not a fan of the artist who gets on stage and's like, this song is about blah blah blah, blah. And I'm like, well thanks, like I didn't really want that. Like I wanted it I wanted it to be what I wanted it to be about. In fact, as I'm talking, I'm remembering the first time I went to Sounds of the Underground and Lamb of God was headlining, and I was like, I don't know, like 17 or something. And I loved the song and still love it, 11th Hour. Like, that's one of my favorite songs that Lamb of God has ever done. And it's just such this dark, dingy song. And I had so many like personal thoughts about like what that song meant to me. And then Lamb of God got up there and they're like, we're going to play 11th Hour. This is our drinking song. And I'm like, fuck, dude, like
God.
that really kind of like ruins it for me a little bit. Like, I don't want that.
Yeah. No, that's dude. I'm right there with you. I'm always pretty reticent about getting into the exact specifics of what my lyrics are about or what experiences they're derived from or who they're about. I mean, sometimes it's obvious, and other times I've said enough that it's like relatively clear, I think. But no, it's exactly what you said, man. I think that the most like this is almost sort of the point of literature and poetry is to allow you to inhabit someone else's internality for a while and to really empathize with them and put yourself into their situation. And sometimes, yeah, I think too much detail or too much specificity or just too much clarity can kind of interrupt that process. Something can poke out of what's being offered that strikes you as at odds with your own personality. And that can make this experience of inhabiting someone else's mind or emotional core a lot less powerful. And in general, like the more you can, internalize that sense of, sharing internality with someone else, that's what creates like, actual human empathy between people, and that's to me a really important part of art. This is why, like, there's the famous the famous Stalin quote, the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of 10,000 is the statistic, or whatever it is. That line, it gets exactly at that point. The more that you think of other people as being just empty, interchangeable ciphers, the less inclined you are to treat them like human beings. So in that sense, it's like a very political matter to me.
Yeah.
Like the importance of being able to, communicate in art the experience of what it's like to be someone else. Am I achieving that in Pyrrhon? Like, who knows? Maybe sometimes, hopefully, but it is like it's something I think about all the time when I'm writing. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a core issue with really almost everything we're dealing with right now, is that sort of othering of people constantly, regardless of where they come from. And it's always ironic to me too, because I know like a lot of the people, and I'm trying not to get too political here because I don't really like going down that avenue and dividing, but I feel like this is a universal issue because, there's the people I know who are in my family too, and they try to really stand up for people who are marginalized and who do tend to other people. But what I see ironically is in the process, they start to other groups of people in doing so, and how they describe it and who they point the finger at. And I'm like, well, like, is that really helpful too when we, go to that place? Because now we're acting like that group of people is a certain way, and then you're putting them in a box and treating them like they're not really human beings, and that doesn't really get to the core issue of it either. But I don't know, I'm just rambling here, but that's just something that I'm constantly thinking about when I see people talking about these things.
I mean, look, politics is very complicated. Definitely, there's cases in which there is legitimate grounds for actual dispute and conflict between people. I'm not totally a peace and love, just like understand everyone's humanity, man, kind of guy. It's not who I am.
Yeah, I think that's definitely where you and I differ a little bit, which is fine. Like, we need those differing perspectives.
Sure, but at the same time, I also do think that like you should remember that other people are human, and you should try at least to understand where they're coming from, regardless of the circumstances. That doesn't mean you need to be even nice to them. Sometimes you can understand where they're coming from and be like, you're a fucking asshole. That's where you're coming from. But at the same time, I think that like, as far as what art can contribute to this kind of broad unraveling that we are all undergoing right now, it's, among other things, at least some understanding of what someone who isn't you might be experiencing. And in the case of Pyrrhon, I'm not like, the songs aren't really about me per se, but they are at least trying to express something about, I don't know, it's hard for me to really articulate exactly what I'm getting at here, but there's like a reaching out involved.
No, but that's what's cool about it, is like there's a certain level of challenge to it too. I like music that's challenging in some way, and it sounds like even though you wrote it and play it, it's still challenging you on some level, because articulating it in non-musical form is difficult. I mean, like most things on this podcast, I think this again brings me back to that classic David Lynch way of thinking with that interview where they asked him, like, can you explain that a little bit more? He's like, no.
Right.
No, not gonna do that. Like, I love that.
Yeah. That's, I mean, I agree. That's kind of like how that, like, to me, look, it varies from project to project. I'm not going to act like there's some like the ineffable and glorious depravity. It's like, no, that's a dumb death metal band. Like, we sing about dumb death metal things. It's fine. Like
there's room for that too.
Like, but like it's just like fun riffs with heavy songs that are catchy, hopefully, right? Whereas with Pyrrhon, we're trying to be like express things that we couldn't really express through other means, right? If it's possible to just put this stuff into an essay and communicate the same thing, then that would be the appropriate medium for it, not a crazy fucking noise metal record or whatever you want to call us. Like it is really trying to do something that can only be done in that very, very specific, very, very particular combination of sort of sounds and words and stuff. So
It's like,
so yes, of course, I
yeah.
fall on my face trying to describe what I'm trying to do in
No,
lyrics.
that's kind of the fun of these interviews for me too, is trying to pick people where they have made an album that's like that, and trying to sort of stumble our way through it. And what comes out of that is usually quite fun. But I think ultimately it does go back to, again, kind of what he said in that interview is, well, the if you want an explanation, the movie is the explanation. Like, go watch the movie. Like, that's my thoughts and feelings right there. Like, I can't put it into words, otherwise I would have. So yeah,
Yeah, and I
it's
think
cool stuff.
musicians and artists of all kinds, but I think in some ways, especially musicians, are always put in this position of trying to articulate this thing, because in order to promote it, it's like it's part of the press cycle. You go out and you talk about it, and
Yeah,
people like to hear that stuff. And like as a fan, I am fond of interviews. I like to hear sort of some behind the scenes perspective on what created the work. But ultimately, it's never going to be more than a supplemental experience for exactly that reason. All you
yeah,
can do is kind of dance around the issue in a way.
yeah. And yeah, Chris and I did, Chris, another writer on Metal Trenches, we were just talking about this the other day too, where it's great too when we get to talk to people who are genuinely willing to just like chat and sort of go off script, so to speak, because both of us have had situations where we interviewed somebody where it was clear that either because of like what the label was telling them to say, or like there was some sort of script that they kind of had to follow, and like they weren't even able to answer the question of kind of like, what's your favorite song? It's like, well, they're all my favorite songs. And it's like, come on, man, like don't don't do that. Like, give me something. Like, just
Yeah.
chat. Yeah,
I think a lot of artists who are not more in like the writerly side of things just don't feel comfortable saying anything because they're so afraid of face planting. They're so afraid of not being able to articulate themselves the way they want or say something dumb.
yeah,
There's lots of guys who are just like, I'm good at guitar and yelling. I'm not, necessarily someone who is good at speaking extemporaneously, and yet they're just required like everybody else to go out and do these things. So yeah, I think that like especially for higher profile artists who are of that temperament, they just have the press machinery of the label being like, all right, here's your stock answers basically. Like just go give a version of this to every interview. And whereas with Pyrrhon, our PR lady Shannon is great, but she's not just prepping all of our answers for us. We're kind of just like saying whatever we feel like. We're just like a pretty unvarnished kind of band. I mean, there's other bands that are, even relatively close to us stylistically speaking, where they're just like very guarded. They don't want to say anything about their creative process and stuff. And I don't know, it's just not who we are. We're like a
yeah,
little bit more loosey goosey kind of people.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting, even like between different band members. Like I did recently where I had previously interviewed one member of the band, and then this time interviewed a different member of the band, and just the difference in their personalities and their ability to kind of just sort of engage and be loose and talk was just night and day. And so it's just, you never know what you're gonna get. That's part of the fun.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been doing a bunch of group podcast interviews. I decided that it was maybe better just to do a one-on-one for this one because we've talked before. We have a good rapport, and sometimes when you have too many people on the line, it can get a little hairy. But yeah, Pyrrhon's been doing a bunch of like group interviews, which have been really fun to do because you get a sense of. We have like a
Yeah.
very sort of noisy in-band dynamic. We're always shouting over each other and like making in jokes and shit like that. And I feel like that's a really important part of the music too, because so much of our music is about this kind of spontaneous in-person collaboration where we're all, kind of playing off of each other. That it's been really fun to do like group interviews with the whole band because there's
Yeah.
an element of that can't be captured by just me talking about it, that you can
Yeah.
only get if we're all talking amongst ourselves. And I think that's like a really huge part of the band's personality. So,
Yeah.
so we're all pretty talkative. I find that I'm the one who ends up doing the most interviews just because I'm like kind of as the singer, I'm the spokesman.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, those usually do end up being some of my favorite episodes on here, when we get a bunch of bunch of band members together, but I know logistically it's a lot more difficult to make that happen and schedules to align and all that. So I take what I can get, but it is fun to have multiple people on.
Yeah, well, at some point in the future, next time we got a press cycle, we should do the whole band thing, because you're gonna
for
hear
sure.
like it'll mostly just be Steve and Eric like yelling jokes at each other the whole time.
Well, I'll probably be bugging you again when that Sepidus album formalizes too.
That's coming down the pipeline, man. I've got 2 more songs to write lyrics for. I've got like a draft for one of them. Eric has 1 more song to do bass for. And then I think we're waiting on there's going to be a bunch of guest guitar solos on it. I think waiting for 2 more of those to come through. And yeah, we're planning to finish it this year. I mean, it's been like really crawling along for like 2 years at this point. It's been kind of like in the background while, Weeping Stores was, in the midst of a cycle at one point, and then Pyrrhon had to finish the Pyrrhon record. And Steve, who is the main songwriter in Sepidus, he's in college right now. He was on the GI Bill. So he has been like really busy learning to be an engineer. So he's been kind of backburnering it on and off this whole time. So it's been like this thing that's been kind of in the back of my mind since like 2017. And now we're finally getting to the point where it's like going to be completed pretty soon. So it's really exciting. So yeah. So hopefully that'll be out next year, I would guess. Probably. And the Glorious Depravity album should be out sometime next year too. Obviously it's a different group of people, but yeah, I always got lots of shit going on, man. I don't like to twiddle my thumbs.
Yeah, I remember we talked a lot about that last time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But now, especially now that I can't go to any shows or like play like in a practice.
Yeah, you got to be crawling out of your skin sometimes.
Man, that's the one thing that's really bumming me out about lockdown, is just not being able to go to a practice space and jam with people. Like that's really like just playing guitar and singing by myself. I mean, look, it's great that I can practice. Much love to my neighbors for never calling the cops on me, but like it's fucking annoying as hell not being able to go and actually see my bandmates. So,
well, there's always Zoom.
Yeah, right. I see people try to like write music together on Zoom, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna. I can't.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same. Definitely not.
Yeah, right. It seems like it would just make me sad and like not fulfill me to do that. Depending on how long this goes on for, it might be something that we resort to anyway out of sheer fucking desperation.
Yeah, you got to do what you got to do.
Yep, well, that's pure story right there.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down here, I always like to ask that final question of, are there any underground metal albums right now that you feel like deserve a lot more attention that you want to shout out?
Oh, you want some Rex, eh? Oh, I got Rex. Okay, let me go through some shit that I've been listening to recently. So one thing that I just got picked up today is this. I think it's the first EP by this band Bitter Branches, which has the singer from Dead Guy and Kiss It Goodbye. This guy Tim Singer, who's a huge influence on me as a vocalist growing up. It's his first recording of I think he had a demo or 2 previously, but it's his first like solid thing in like many, many years, and it's really good. And it's like kind of a little bit of hardcore, a little bit of noise rock, a little bit of post-punk. I really dig it. There is another project called Underer, featuring this guy Nick Schellenberger, who's best known for this band Cleric, this like really crazy like inter-genre metal kind of band from Philly that Pyrrhon has long.
Is it Cleric with the period at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those guys are sick, man.
Yeah. So it's the bassist and singer, and he's not the bassist. He plays bass sometimes. He's mostly the keyboardist and the singer. It's a solo project that's kind of in the same vein as Cleric, but more stripped down. It's a lot more emphasis on bass because like that's his main string instrument. It's got a drum machine. It's got this weird industrial quality. That one's really cool.
Oh, nice.
There's a new Couch Slut record out. Those guys are great friends of ours, and it's an awesome album. It's more on the up-tempo side for them. It's got a great production. I think Ben Greenberg recorded it. It's nice and compact, 29 minutes, killer record. Love those guys. And then I got two others here, and then I'll stop. Um, there's a band called Medecophobic. It's Medecophobic. They're a New Standard Elite band playing like really, really deranged, messy, brutal death metal with kind of grind presentation. Songs are more on the short side. I've been really loving that record. It's super gross and super fun. And then what else? There's one other thing. There's a band called Grid out of New York City.
Okay, I think I've heard of them.
Yeah, it's more like a noise free improvisation kind of thing. It's got a bunch of it's just like a power trio with three sort of guys from that sort of fringe crazy experimental music scene here, playing this like really staggering, somewhat doom-like kind of noisy free improvisation. And it's really sick. It's awesome music. So yeah, those are just a few things. I don't know. I've always got tons of. Oh, actually, the band I was thinking of earlier wasn't Medecophobic. It was Trichomoniasis. Sorry, a different Nasty Slam band. The Medecophobic is that's like an older record, I think, but it's like a brutal death metal record. Trichomoniasis is the one I was thinking of with the short grind songs. That's what I get for not actually like looking at any notes and just trying to summon this stuff up off the top of my head. Anyway, lots of good music out there.
Yeah.
Go buy some. Musicians are hurting. Please give them your money.
Yep, that's what I keep saying, man. Like I'm trying to buy the same, if not more than what I usually had, because I just know it's a rough time right now for some of these people. Yeah,
it's definitely been really humbling to see people who have the means do everything they can to support the whole world of underground music, given how fucked it is right now. Something I kind of mentioned earlier is that the whole reason all this stuff exists, it's not because it makes sense from a business perspective. The whole existence of underground heavy music operates because of people's enthusiasm and willingness to make sacrifices for it.
Yep.
And so it's really been it's been heartening to see that people are still willing to do that and step up with everything, all the shit hitting the fan right now. So keep at it, guys.
Yep. Definitely keep on doing it. Well, any final plugs in terms of the album, when to expect it? Let me look at my calendar again because I'm forgetting when I had scheduled to have this episode go up. So this will be where'd it go? I lost it. Damn it, where is it? Oh, there it is. So I was planning on putting this up June 15th.
Great. Okay. So
I think that's like a week before the album comes out. Yeah.
Yes. They will come out 11 days after that. Future People. It's going to be on June 26, 2020 through Willowtip Records on CD, LP, and digital. Oh, one other thing I should mention for the LP version, there is an extra bonus track that is not on any other version. It takes up an entire side of the record. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend getting the LP version.
Hell yeah. All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time, and it seems like we could just talk forever, but I've got more stuff to attend to. In fact, my daughter's walking in here to sign her into her virtual cheerleading class now, so fun stuff.
Yeah, so anyway, on total left turn.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, always a good time, and always happy to have you back on here to honestly talk about anything, even if you don't have another album coming out. Because speaking of the idea of some people are, good at interviews and enjoy them, and other people really have a hard time talking, you are clearly very articulate and could I could probably sit here and not say anything and you would carry the entire hour, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, just fucking running my mouth 24/7.
Hell yeah, man.
But yeah, man, no, I really appreciate it. And like you said earlier, there's more shit coming for me pretty soon, so we'll have a good excuse to do this again.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, stay strong, and you know where to find me. Stay in touch.
Yeah, man. Take care of the fam. Stay safe, and yeah, I'm sure we will keep up through the face box.
All right, man.
All right,
Later.
take it easy.
And that'll do it for another episode of Trench Talk. Hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed recording it. Again, I have another episode with Doug Moore talking about his other project, Weeping Sores, that you should check out. And also, like I said, there's an episode now with Ethan McCarthy of Primitive Man, Vermin Womb, and now Many Blessings that is on kind of a similar note, I would say, as this one. But yeah, please do stick around. Again, do subscribe. You can listen to this podcast on all platforms, but also subscribe to the YouTube channel to get all the latest and greatest recommendations in these talented underground musicians out there that absolutely deserve way more attention than what they're getting. Also, down in the description, you can find links to all of the social media, to follow us, the email newsletter I send out personally every Friday to keep you up to date with metaltrenches.com, and our Patreon and Subscribe Star. If you keep coming back and you find yourself really getting added value from my content, then consider contributing even just $1 a month. It makes a difference in helping me cover my overhead costs, improve my equipment, and just sort of expand what I'm doing and justify the time that I put into it. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.